I'm Bonnie Kimke. Welcome to my studio and welcome again to Quilting on a Thread. This is episode 4 of my quilt journey. And if you'll recall, this is a king size modification of a 64-inch by 64-inch pattern that I found online. It's Anne of Green Gables and it's a Riley Blake Designs pattern. It's a lovely pattern, just wasn't large enough for me. So I've taken this basic pattern, dropped it into Electric Quilt, and enlarged it to suit my needs. So along the way, in my earlier episodes, I've talked about the problems that I've had to overcome. One of them being that the backing material that I bought wound up, when I was opening it up to cut into the pieces to become the back, I found that it had a flaw in it. So I needed to modify what I was going to do on the backing. But I loved the material so much and I felt that it really, really complemented this top. So I went ahead and did a disappearing 9 patch for the bottom of my quilt. But that made me have to change the stitching that I had drawn out that would have fit perfectly in these 4x4 quilt blocks. So they actually wound up being 16 inches by 16 inches, but they were 4-inch blocks by 4-inch blocks that created medallions, if you will, throughout the quilt. And this was drawn up to go into those medallions. So I had to change that, and I came to use this Quilt Off modern wave ruler, and it has 2 distinct waves, and if you turn it over, then it reverses those waves, and so it winds up having 4 distinct waves, and that's creating a waving pattern that goes throughout the quilt. Then you'll recall that I had a problem with my glide thread. When I would go left to right, the thread's perfect, but when I would come back right to left, I would have the twist on the thread being unwound. And so that was causing the thread to shred. So what I did was change the tension on the bobbin and change the tension in the upper thread assembly. And that eased up the shredding a good deal. Another thing that I did is ever so slightly twist the eye of the needle to the right. So instead of the eye of the needle going 6 to 12, I have the eye of the needle going 5:25 to 11:55. It's just a very, very slight twist. You could hardly see the twist of the needle, of the eye of the needle, but the thread sees it, and the thread wasn't unwinding, it wasn't being stressed as much. But another thing that I found that is helping is not to try and go the whole distance in my zone, but to sew for about 6 inches and then let my thread rest, and that lets the twist reconfigure itself. So it's taking me a lot longer to come right to left than it has been taking me to go right to left. So as I'm doing this quilt, I'm doing 5 or 6 waves in zone by zone, going left to right. And then rather than coming all the way back and rehooping to this end again, I'm starting at the right end and coming to the left, and I'm doing 5 or 6 rows. Now there's a reason for doing that, other than the fact that it's just less of a bother to rehoop, but it also, when you're sewing a pattern and you're sewing row upon row upon row of your quilt, and you go continuously on the same direction, right to left, or left to right, whichever direction you go, what happens is your quilt starts twisting in that direction. So by going 5 rows this way, 5 rows that way, 5 rows this way, it eases that tendency of the quilt to start leaning in that direction. So it's important that I be able to do that, and it's important to be aware of what is happening to the thread. And the glide thread is a double filament twist. So it's 2 distinct filaments that are twisted together. And so those threads can come unwound when being stressed in the wrong direction. So by being aware of everything that's going on, I've been able to very successfully get about halfway through my quilt. And I'm hoping that I can finish the quilt before this weekend so that I can begin binding the quilt. And at that point, we'll come back for edition 5, episode 5 of this series. So I hope you'll stay with me.